Sector 019, the last coordinate transmitted by the Thales probe before the signal was cut off mid-sentence. The live feed ended so suddenly it was as if someone had simply pulled the cable out of thin air. The Frontier arrived after 37 standard cycles. They expected to see asteroids, maybe a wormhole, or evidence of space piracy. But there was a planet. It wasn't on the star charts. It wasn't on the telescope's images, even when they were already approaching. Only when the ship was within 0.03 astronomical units did the blackness appear out of nowhere. Spherical, matte. It didn't reflect light. It seemed to absorb it. And in the middle of the black continent, a giant circle, an eye. Scanners are down. Surface is absorbing signals. This is not a natural form, Science Officer Talia Kane said, her voice shaking despite her familiarity with anomalies. From that moment on, everything went wrong. Technician Roddick was the first to disappear. The day before, he had complained about noise, like someone was scratching the paneling from the inside. No one had heard anything. Then he began to say that he saw someone in the corridors, a girl with black eyes and a torn teddy bear. When Roddick disappeared, a metal plate with the following phrase scratched into it was found on his bed. Gel ergistes here. The crew panicked. Captain Drake tried to maintain discipline, but he himself became withdrawn. An old fear began to torment him, the fear of being back in the airlock alone with the vacuum. He said the eye could see him. Everyone began to think that the planet knew what they were afraid of and was showing it to them. Dr. Uno has a theory. It's not just a planet. It's an object of psychoactive perception. It doesn't interact with matter, but with the mind. It remembers, absorbs, and reflects. We don't study her. She studies us. Like a mirror, only it doesn't reflect an image, but fear. Talia began to see her brother, drowned on Mars, in the reflection of the terminals. He looked at her, whispering words she did not understand. But the same symbols appeared again and again in the system. Anarin Idair. He woke up. The signals from the Frontier began to falter. The monitors showed distortion, noise, short bursts of images, as if someone or something was overriding the signal structure. The navigation charts no longer showed the planet. In its place was emptiness, as before arrival. But the ship continued to drift near the blackness, as if attached to it by invisible threads. Talia was no longer asleep. She was watching the sensors, recording every vibration, every shadow on the internal cameras. It seemed to her that the corridors were changing. Not physically. The angle, the length, the light were the same. But she felt them changing, as if someone inside the ship was drawing invisible patterns on the walls. And then she saw the door to the maintenance bay open by itself, slowly, with a creak that had not been there before. Darkness inside, breath behind it, or the illusion of breath, warm, as if from the depths of some gigantic forgotten organism. Dr. Uno found the second plate. It had the same phrase on it, only it had been scratched from the inside of a cabinet with medical ampoules. No one could get in there except her. She swore she hadn't written it. When asked what it could mean, she didn't answer. She just stared into space, toward the porthole, where the planet still hung in the vacuum, motionless, unnaturally even, like a hole cut into the very fabric of reality. On the third day, Captain Drake disappeared. The cameras showed him walking out of the airlock. He didn't even put on a spacesuit. He opened the outer door. His body didn't fly out. It disappeared into absolute blackness, and the space outside the airlock seemed to distort for a moment, as if the ship had blinked. Only one more phrase remained, etched directly into the inside of the helmet hanging by the emergency station. AJ Jeriza Grundes. That night, Talia woke up to someone standing by her bed, not moving, just watching. When she jumped up and turned on the light, no one was there. But there were fingerprints on the wall, black, charred as if someone had held their hand in a fire before touching the metal. She locked herself in the cabin, shaking from the cold, but not from fear, from understanding. The planet was not watching them. It was not an eye. It was a pupil, window. What was on the other side was now looking back, and it was no longer asleep. When Juno tried to initiate a reverse launch to pull the Frontier out of orbit around the planet, all systems failed. There was no emergency power, no response from the ship's AI. Commands were entered, cursors blinked, but nothing was executed. It seemed as if the ship was still functioning. Lights worked, doors opened, even ventilation rustled in the walls. But all this seemed more like a set, as if the ship was still playing the role of the Frontier, but no longer was. Juno locked herself in the engine room. She spent her last hours recording audio messages, in a calm voice, almost emotionless, as if observing herself from the outside. In her last message, she said, "He learns faster than we thought. We weren't the first. We are just another glance in his direction. And each glance brings the awakening closer. This is not a planet. This is memory, collective. The cosmos remembers, Talia, remembers everything." Talia was left alone. The others disappeared over the next 2 days. One stood up silently and walked out into the void. Another simply stopped responding, and when Talia went looking for him, she found his cabin filled with a fine black dust. She tried to transmit a signal, even send an automatic tag. Nothing got through. All frequencies were jammed by the return wave, in the spectrum of which she caught a distorted human voice, repeating the same words. The name is the key. The name is the entrance. She began to see dreams that could not be hers. She woke up with the feeling that she was in another body, in another era, under another sky. And always the same ending, a black sky without stars and in it, a pupil, the same as on the planet. Sometimes it blinked. She had no memory of coming down to the surface. Her diary is interrupted by the phrase, "If I go there, maybe I'll see what he wants. Maybe then it'll all be over." The last entry in the Frontier logs is a video, blurred, red-tinted. The camera is at an odd angle as if nailed to a wall. In the background is Thalia, walking across a black plain. The background is distorted. Behind her is a giant shadow, indistinct, pulsating, like a swarm of eyes and voices moving as one. Before the footage ends, Talia turns right into the camera. She smiles and whispers, "Now I see. Now I am a part." The recording cuts off. Then the screen goes black. The final frame shows a word etched into the very center of the command cabin window. Simple, clear, but not in any language known to man. Nostra. If you translate it, you get return. Project Frontier is officially classified as a failed mission, lost due to anomalous gravitational collapse. No bodies, no debris, no signal. Just a void in the archive and one erased sector where no drones or people are sent anymore. But some people still didn't believe it. Rena Lee was a child when her mother, Talia Kane, disappeared along with the ship. She was told the mission had been destroyed during a routine hyperspace jump test. But Rena knew better, because the day before she disappeared, a letter had arrived, encrypted, addressed only to her, in the code she and her mother used to communicate secretly through mirrors. If you ever see an eye, don't look into it. If you hear him speak, don't answer. If he calls your name, it means he is already inside. Rena grew up to become an independent astronavigator and cryptographer. Years later, she managed to find a fragment of video encrypted in the wreckage of the old Thales probe. It was not visible in the spectrum of the human eye, only in a narrow range of psycho-emotional emissions. And there was a voice, Thalia's whisper. "This is not the end, Rena. He left me, so you could hear, so you could come, so he could come through you." The dreams began a week later. In them, Rena stood on a plain under a black sky. In front of her was a giant pupil, and in it was a face, not Talia's, her own, only slightly distorted, too calm, without pupils. She began to hear phrases spoken in a language from the Frontier messages, a language she did not know, but she understood. Scars began to appear on her skin, not from pain, but as burns, forming signs. Some of them she deciphered. He returns, through us, through the name. She realized the contact was not complete. The frontier was not dead. It had become a gateway. Thalia is not dead. She's inside, and she is not alone anymore. Rena had assembled the mission herself, secretly, without protocol, without official permission, just her, the Noctilux, and coordinates carved from her own dreams. When she approached that very sector, the instruments were silent, but in the porthole, out of nowhere, a sphere appeared. The same, black, eternally motionless. And this time, the eye was no longer asleep. It was open, and behind it, not darkness, but space in which something was moving. Worried, approaching, a message flashed on the air. "Delis yo maimon." Now we can talk. Rena put on the helmet and closed her eyes. And she answered, "I hear you." From that moment on, there was no turning back. The darkness was not darkness. When Rena entered it, the sensations of the body disappeared, but consciousness did not dissolve. On the contrary, it became brighter. Everything was audible, not with the ears, but directly in the thoughts. Voices, indistinguishable but full of meaning. They did not speak in words, but touched memories as if someone was leafing through an album of her memory, deciding what to leave. There was no planet, no ship before her. There was only him, but not as a figure, not as a being, more like a feeling, a presence that displaced everything else. He did not take over. He expanded. And Rena was part of that expansion. You are a thread. You are straight. You are the bridge. She realized that he was not evil and not kind. He simply was. A word, a thought, ancient, alien, not subject to linear time. And he did not wake up. He remembered himself, collected parts in the universe through those who looked into the eye. "Can you hear me?" A familiar voice sounded, a woman's. Talia, but not her mother, or not quite anymore. A form appeared before Rena, human, but as if woven from black light and ashen lines. The face moved belatedly, like a reflection in a dream. "I'm holding on, but I'm not alone. He let me stay so you could get to the end, so we could get there." "To what end?" asked Rena. Thought. Thalia raised her hand, her fingers trembling like signals in the void. Before everything, before the name. At that moment, Rena felt a vibration, not in her ears, but in the very structure of her mind. Her personality, her I, was cracking at the seams. He was not breaking. He was rewriting. One by one, the memories became transparent, revealing something ancient lying beneath them. As if she were not a person, but a vessel, a carrier of a fragment of truth, forgotten by all. The name is the form. The name is the key. The name is the boundary. You are the name that remains. Give it to him. But Rena remembered the letter, her mother's last words. If he calls your name, it means he's already inside. She stopped. She felt the heat. She leaned her consciousness against him, refusing to answer. He went silent. For a split second, there was emptiness. And in that pause, a whisper appeared, another one, faint, melodic, like a drop of sound in the silence. It was not a planet, not him. It was herself, her inner voice. Don't let it. Find your word. Say, not what he asks. Say what is not there. Rena concentrated. Instead of a name, she spoke emptiness. Not a word, but an echo, intention, refusal. A form that no one could read because it had not yet been born. The world shook. The shadow arched as if in pain. He couldn't understand. He could not perceive that which had no form. He retreated. Thalia smiled. You found a way out, not for us, for everyone. Now you are the mirror, Rena. Now you are the eye, but you are the one looking. Rena opened her eyes. She was back in the Noctilux's cockpit. Everything seemed the same, but she knew. He still existed. But now, under her observation, under the human gaze, and somewhere far away in the black space, the empty planet lost its pupil. The open eye disappeared. He fell asleep again, but not for long. Over the next few years, Rena remained silent. When she returned, she gave no official reports. She did not post her records. She was interrogated, scanned, tested for memory simulation, for psychological stability, all to no avail. The diagnosis: deep psychological withdrawal, a rare condition in which the consciousness blocks the experience in order to maintain integrity. That's what they decided. It was easier for them. Rena simply disappeared from the radar. First she quit, then she changed her name. She settled on the outskirts of the lunar archipelago of Io, in a misty valley where old beacons still flashed with light by inertia, receiving no signals from anywhere. But she knew this was not the end. Sometimes, when the stars were covered by a haze, not natural but as if muffled, she felt something touching her thoughts again, softly, carefully, no longer by force, as before, already a question, as if the darkness had learned to wait. One night, a strange code arrived in her terminal. No address, no source. It consisted of 3 symbols. Thai. She froze, because she knew it wasn't a name. It was a call. And behind it is an image, a view from a surveillance camera in one of the schools on Earth. The frame shows a boy, about 10 years old. He stands by the window and looks at the sky. The camera shakes. For a moment, the boy's pupils dilate, becoming completely black. He turns to the lens and whispers, "I see him." Rena closes her eyes. She feels something inside her responding, something ancient that stayed with her, but was silent. Until this day. He didn't leave. He just switched. Now, through her, through the trace left in the depths of the psychic field, he tries differently, softer, quieter, through dreams, through children. The planet may still be hanging in the void, dead and invisible, but the eye is no longer needed, because now we look inside ourselves, and something looks back. Rena opens the old login system, finds the archive, loads the coordinates. She has no weapons, no team, no support, but there is a name that did not exist, and now it is hers. She whispers it, silently on the border between herself and the shadow. "I am the threshold." And at that moment, somewhere on Earth, in the mirror of a school toilet, in the glass of a boy with black pupils, the glass begins to breathe. The boy's name was Elian. He didn't know where the name came from. It wasn't on any papers, and no one called him that. But when he first looked in the mirror and said it, it sounded like it was already there. Things had changed since then. He could see more than the others. Layers were transparent, overlapping reality, as if someone had forgotten to turn off the world overlay mode. People moved slightly differently. Voices came before mouths could speak, and sometimes from empty corners. He had dreams in which he stood on a plain of ashes, and in the sky hung a huge black spiral. There he met a woman with eyes the color of emptiness. She did not speak, but he knew. She was where he was supposed to be. He called her the threshold, and one day he woke up with a name on his lips. Not my own, but true. Thai. The name vibrated in his chest like a foreign seed. It couldn't be said out loud, or the air would crack and the shadows in the room would lengthen. He'd first said it when he tried to stop a school monitor from yelling at a girl in his junior year. He just said it. Thai. And the man froze. Then he retreated. Then he disappeared behind the door and never returned. He was forgotten, even in the records, even in the registers, as if he had never existed. Since then, Elian began to hear others, in dreams, in reflections, in the sounds of old speakers and between the lines of books that no one read. They were like him, watchers. Each of them carried a fragment of the word. Each was a connection, a bridge between reality and what remained beyond. Some were destroyed by this connection. Their bodies could not withstand it. Their minds burned out. Others disappeared, rewritten, became something else. But Elian was different. He didn't look. He listened. And one day he answered, not by voice, in a word, just one. You are not a messenger. You are the gate. At that very moment, on the other side of the system, in the lost valley of Io, Rena jumped out of her bunk, a sharp blow in her chest. In her ears, that very voice that she had once drowned within herself. "He's back, but not through you." He found another. She understood immediately. Child, not infected, selected. But by whom? He was no longer who he had been before. Now he was studying, adapted. And the most dangerous thing is that he learned to hope. Rena knew there was little time left. If Elian spoke the second name, if he took form through it, then the end would not be destruction. And the beginning of something that can no longer be stopped. Night. The stars in the sky trembled, as if someone was holding them by strings and tugging them from time to time. Elian sat on the roof of the old school looking up. He felt, deep in the sky, something was brewing, not like a storm, not like an invasion, but like a return. Word. It breathed inside him, sometimes quietly, like a sleeping animal, sometimes like the heart of someone else, beating next to his own. He did not know what would happen if he spoke the second name, but it was already beginning to manifest itself in thoughts, in rustling sounds, in the pauses between the beats of time. He no longer felt alone. Others began to appear all over the world. He did not know their faces, but he knew their dreams. In them, the same symbols, the same planet, and the eye. Some called themselves watchers, others tongueless. And then there were those who wore marks on their skin. They called themselves the guardians of the limit. Elian didn't know whose side he was on. He felt that there was more than just a voice inside him. There was a will, but it wasn't just him. There was someone else. Someone who looked at the eye from the inside. Someone who wouldn't let it fully enter. Maybe Thalia. Maybe something deeper. Meanwhile, Rena found an ancient station. An abandoned observatory from the early space missions. Inside, in the archive section, she found something she couldn't explain. An old photograph. It was her, young, but behind her was the figure of a boy. Light hair, dark eyes, Elian. Only the photo was dated 30 years before his birth. On the reverse side, there is an inscription. "If you want to stop him, stop yourself." It was not just a cycle. It was the loop of the name. Someone, or something, used time as a fabric, sewing the contours of approach. And now, it seemed, it was all supposed to start with Elian and end with her. She activated a long-forgotten protocol, the Star Canceller, a system capable of sending a pulse through all the waves that resonated with the primordial language, the one that awakened him. This system could temporarily silence the name, but the price is colossal. All watchers will disappear. Rena knew she had only one choice, to come to him, not as an enemy, not as a savior. And what about the threshold? On the roof of the school, Elian closed his eyes. He already knew that she was coming, not physically, not on the ground, but like a shift, like a whisper of matter. And he was ready. He stood up and spread his arms, and he pronounced the second name, Sayer. At that moment, the sky began to close, like an eye that slowly blinks. But Rena was already standing next to me, not as a body, but as a mirror. And when the name responded, she did not stop it. She added her own to it. Sayer Ra. The name became new. He froze. And then the impossible happened. He looked and didn't understand, because the name was human, not born of darkness, not returned, but suffered. And in this name, for the first time, the eye blinked not inward, but outward. The word turned into the limit, and he no longer spoke to people, and people to him. The world after Ra became different, not suddenly, not a flash, not a catastrophe, but like a quiet turn of the internal mechanism of the universe, when everything still stands in its place, but the air is already different. Words were no longer just sounds. Some of them became windows. Others are knots in the fabric of the world. People began to feel. When they told lies, the space trembled. When they pronounced the names of the dead, interference appeared in the mirrors. And when someone accidentally whispered the name of Ra, the electricity went out. Not from fear, from recognition. One by one, the watchers began to awaken. Those who had been touched by the eye before. They woke from nightmares and could no longer separate sleep from day. Some disappeared. Others gathered together, forming a new circle, the Word Keepers. They traveled the world, collecting fragments of sound. They found those in whom the echo of the name lived, children who were silent, but in the silence their breath caused precipitation, old people who had forgotten the language but whose silence healed the pain, artists whose paintings whispered when they were looked at for a long time. Elian disappeared. After the name was connected, he dissolved. But he didn't disappear completely. Rena felt him, sometimes in the streams of radio noise, sometimes in other people's dreams. He became a structure, not a god, not a shadow. He was now part of a new language, one that was built not from letters but from feelings, from connections, from something that had no name until now. Ra is not a name, it was right. The right to rename darkness. Rena left the station, went to Earth. She didn't hide. But the world didn't notice her. She spoke little now. Every word was a weapon or a cure. And one day, in a noisy room full of people, she heard someone say a word she didn't know. It passed easily, past the ears of the others, but it hit her right in the chest. The boy, not Elian but with the same eyes, looked at her and whispered, "Shael." Rena winced. It was a new name, the first since then. So the cycle starts again, but not like before. Now they hold their tongues. Now they write the meaning. The planet with the eye has long since disappeared, or has been rewritten, but what came from there remained. And as long as a person can speak, he can create. His name was Lior, and he didn't know that the word that accidentally escaped his lips changed the world. He was not a watcher. He was not trained, not connected to the frontier, did not know the legends of the eyes, of Talia, of Ren, of Sayer. He simply loved collecting sounds, making up meaningless words like children do when they search for music in the silence. He said them to himself, repeated them until they sounded right. And one day when he was alone at home, he said, "Shael," and something changed. The room became too quiet. The window shook, although there was no wind. The shadow of the book on the table lengthened, as if space had slowed. And in the reflection of the off-screen, for a second, he saw a figure standing behind him, tall, faceless, and behind the back is a wing, only one, black, pulsating like living tissue. And then everything disappeared, but the name remained. He said it again, in class, unconsciously, at a moment when the teacher forgot his name. He just stood there staring into space until the bell rang, waking everyone from their stupor. And later, on the bus, the driver suddenly burst into tears. When asked what had happened, he said, "I suddenly remembered my mother, her voice, although I didn't even know what she sounded like." Lior began to understand. Shael was doing something to reality. Opens it, but not like Ra, not in breadth but in depth. This is not an eye. This is a heart. Rena heard his name from a student of the old school of watchers, accidentally, a cropped video, in the noise like an echo. She knew this wasn't just a new cycle. This is a new wave. Because Shael was not summoned by the eye. He was born in man. This meant one thing. The name can now be born without external interference. So the word has become ours. She found Lior. He was ordinary, stubborn. He didn't want to be chosen. He didn't look for meaning in his words. He just spoke because he felt it. "Why did you come up with this name?" she asked. "I didn't invent it. It just came. Everything inside became quiet, and then it appeared." She nodded. He was not the watcher. He was the listener. And it was more dangerous. Because if people had heard the other before, now the other can hear us. Shael is spreading. Those who hear it begin to remember, not their own lives but others. Remembering what never was. Cities without names, a shadow under a sun that never rose, and a voice, quiet, feminine. Whatever you name, it will become. But not everything that will become will withstand the name. The world is changing, not by science, not by war, in a word. And Lior has to make a choice. Tell Shael to the world, or forget him forever, because the next name will not be a door. And with a rune that depicts the new language, Lior did not choose, the word chose him. With each passing day, Shael grew inside. He did not pronounce it out loud, but it whispered from under his skin, in time with his heart. People around him began to change. Some forgot the names of their loved ones. Others suddenly remembered events that had not happened. There appeared those who felt the sound without hearing it. They began to cry, looking at an empty wall, or smile when Lior simply passed by. It became a resonance zone, and Rena understood. There was little time left. Shael was different. Not a reflection of the eye, not a shard of darkness. It was a living name, and it learned with Lior. He did not wear it. They merged. One night, Ren was awakened by a flash. Above the city, in the sky, a giant symbol, elongated like calligraphy, glowing pale gold. It trembled as if written by a child's hand on wet glass. People came out of their houses, silent. Birds did not fly. The waves on the sea froze at their peak. It was not a signal. It was a rehearsal of the word. Then they came, those whom Rena hoped never to meet again. Languageless, those who had once swallowed their name to survive the touch of the eye. They were a shadow among men, a freezing gaze, a presence not inscribed in reality. And now they looked at Lior, but did not attack. They waited. "What do they want?" he asked. Rena hesitated. "If you say Shael out loud in front of the world, they will die, because this word is a new beginning, and they belong to the end." Lior remained silent. In his dreams, Shael became a form. She had a voice. She had a body, almost, like a girl, but not quite. Her fingers were too long, her eyes reflected a sky that did not exist. She called herself Echo before birth, and she said that Lior is not the first but the only one who can not only say but hear his own name before it becomes a word. He began to understand that everything that had happened before him was a struggle for power over words. But Shael is not power. It is a change in the laws of perception. One day he stood before a crowd. People gathered because they felt, even those who did not know why they came. And he said, "I am not a prophet, I am not a bearer, I am simply a man. But inside each of us there is a word. It is not for control, it is not for salvation, it is for embodiment." He closed his eyes and said, "Shael," quiet, without pathos, no light. But everything has changed. People began to hear each other for real, without distortion, without barriers. The deaf heard, the dumb spoke, the lonely understood that they were not alone for a moment. The world did not become paradise, but it became transparent. The space between souls decreased. The word became a bridge, not a weapon, not fear, but a new beginning of language. The eye was no longer needed. Now we looked at each other. But deep down in the old layer of the universe's memory, in the silent darkness where the name still remained inexpressible, something woke up. It heard Shael, and it said, "Finally, a word worthy of an answer." Lior heard the answer not with his ears. It passed through everything, skin, memory, bones. It was not a word, but a pressure, as if the universe itself had stopped inhaling, forgetting that it had to exhale. The voice was not hostile, but there was not a drop of humanity in it. It did not carry meaning, it was meaning, a word spoken from beyond the limits of language itself. "You named it. Now I respond, but you are not ready to hear, because you are a form, and I, to the form." The Shael inside Lior trembled, like a fire that had been filled with ice water. He felt reality sag slightly, as if it were becoming liquid, soft. Rena stood nearby, silently. She knew. This was not a war. This was not a threat. This was a meeting. The first real mutual contact between a human and that which existed before sound. Lior answered. Not with words, he let him in. And the world froze. 1 second stretched out like a century. Everyone who had ever felt the touch of the name, from Rena to the forgotten watchers, from children talking in their sleep to the tongueless, all remembered, not their lives, but the life of the world, the very one he led while no one called his name. A light flared up inside Lior, not blinding but warm, quiet, like a mother's voice calling her child from a dream. He understood. The other is not an enemy. It is an echo. It is a response. It has always been there. It was waiting for someone to say a word that was not for the authorities, but out of love. And Shael opened up. Became not a name, but a song. Everyone who has ever been afraid, lost, kept silent, has received their sound, their note. And for a moment, very short, everything became one language. There were no more boundaries. There was no more he and we. There was only speech, and in it a silence that said more than the universe could ever express. And then everything became normal again. Wind, people, streets, silence. But something remained. People began to take care of their words, to speak more quietly, to listen more attentively, to seek the essence, not the form. The name Shael was no longer spoken. It became sacred, not as a taboo, but as a breath, always within, always with you. Lior disappeared. He didn't die. He didn't leave. He just dissolved into what he had awakened. Now, when someone searches for meaning, he hears a voice. Quiet, native. I am here. I am you when you listen. And in the distant sector where the I once was, the light came on, finally, not like a lighthouse. And what is the answer?